Chapter 7, Section 3 is on negative exponents. So just one more special rule that we keep separate from yesterday so that we can kind of get a grasp on yesterday before we move on to today. So let's just kind of think about some things. 10 to the third is 1,000. 10 squared is 100. 10 to the first is 10. 10 to the 0 is 1. 10 to the negative 1? Do that in your calculator, you're going to be at 0.1. 10 to the negative 2 is going to be 0.01. And 10 to the third is 0.001. So what is the relationship is the real question. Well, 0.1 is really the fraction 1 over 10. 0.01 is 1 over 100, and then 1 over 1,000. So what really happened? If I had a negative exponent, I really took the reciprocal, right? 10 in the first was 10, 10 in the negative 1 was 1 over 10. So our theorem today says b to the negative n is 1 over b to the n. So you're not allowed to have a negative exponent, so in order to get rid of it, you're going to take the reciprocal. Okay, so you're going to take it from the top, because this is really over 1, and then flip it to 1 over b to the n. Okay, so we're going to take the reciprocal today. So if I have 7d to the negative 2, how do I simplify that so I don't have any negatives? And I'm going to write this again, and this was on yesterday's notes. Remember to keep numbers and variables separate. Okay, that's a key idea yesterday and today. Remember to keep those two things separate. Okay, so that you keep in mind what actually has a negative exponent. So when I look at letter A, 7 has a positive exponent of 1, so that stays on the top, but d to the negative 2 is negative, so I have to move that down to the bottom of the fraction to become positive, so d squared. Okay, so numbers and variables are separate. The d has to move because it's negative, but the 7 stays. Okay, so likewise in part B, 5 is positive, so that's going to stay where it is, but the x to the negative 3, if it was on the bottom, well then it needs to move to the top of the fraction to become x to the third. Okay, so that final answer is 5x to the third if you don't want to see the first power there. Okay, so in part A it was negative on the top, so it went to the bottom. Part B it was negative, so it was the top. So it flips whatever spot it was in. Now part C is a full fraction. Okay, a full fraction to a negative, okay, because the thing is in parentheses, what I'm going to do is take the reciprocal first. Well, the reciprocal of 1 over 5x is just 5x, and because I took the reciprocal, this is no longer a negative 2, but it's just to a positive 2. Okay, now from yesterday, remember that if anything is in parentheses being squared, that square has to be distributed, so that becomes 25x squared. Okay, it's not 10, 5 squared is 25, and then x squared, because 1 times 2 is 2. Okay, so in part D, again, just like yesterday, yesterday's rules roll over till today. We've got to distribute our 2. So 10 squared is 100. And then because I have one base here, that's going to become x to the negative 6, because negative 3 times 2 is 6. Well, I can't have a negative. Okay, again, if it helps you to put a positive 1 on that 100, that means that stays because it's got a positive exponent, but the x to the negative 6 needs to move, so it's down in the bottom as x to the positive 6. Okay, so the part with a negative exponent, okay, this part only, needs to move, and then it becomes positive down there. Okay, make sure when you move it, it does become positive. All right, let's try a few more. Example E, 2x squared over 3x to the fourth to the negative 2. Okay, so this is kind of tricky. I have to distribute down here. So I'll leave my 2x squared on top. Now, this is really 3 to the negative 2, so I'm just going to leave that for a second because I'm not quite sure what to do with that. And then x to the negative 8th. Okay, so sometimes to distribute that way might be a little easier. Now, because I have to get rid of my negatives, the 2x squared on the top, this stuff is all positive, so that's going to stay. And then the 3 to the negative 2 has to move up top to be 3 squared as positive, and so does the x to the negative 8th has to move up top as well. Okay, because they were negative, they have to move. Well, then I should be able to simplify from here. So I've got 2x squared times 9x to the 8th. Okay, so now I can simplify further. Numbers are just numbers, so 9 times 2 is 18. I have two different bases, so two different bases means I add the exponent, so my final answer would be 18x to the 10th. Okay, so the tricky part about that was that very first step, and if you're not sure, just leave it as a negative exponent and then move it to the opposite side of the fraction, okay, to get rid of the negatives. So again, these parts were negative, and they moved up here, and then they were positive. Okay, so that's the whole idea today. A negative exponent flips sides of the fractions to get rid of the opposite, to get rid of the negative sign. Okay, so example F has 8 over 6. Okay, again, numbers and variables are separate. So 8 over 6 reduces to 4 over 3. And now I've got x to the 6th over x to the 8th. And if we remember from yesterday, that means I'm supposed to subtract. So that's going to give me x to the negative 2. Okay, well, I can't have a negative, but 4 and 3 are numbers. Okay, those are separate. Keep those separate in your brain. And then the x to the negative 2, that's the part that's negative. So that's the part I have to move. So it becomes a x squared on the bottom. Okay, so again, the x to the negative 2 is the only negative. It goes down to the bottom, and then it became a positive 2. Okay, so numbers and variables are different. Keep that in mind. Okay, a few more. So I've got G. 4 is just a number, so that's different. So it's just going to move over. Now I'm going to subtract. Now watch your negatives. Negative 1 minus a negative 2, because I'm dividing, I'm going to subtract my exponents. That turns into negative 1 plus 2, so that just turns into y to the first, or just y. Okay, so watch. You don't have to flip them first if you don't want to. Okay, so you can just subtract and then see what happens. If you prefer to flip them first, so if you wanted to flip those, you could have made that 4y squared over y to the first, and then 2 minus 1 would have been 1, so you would have gotten 4y. So either way you want to do it, okay, will be completely fine. Part H, okay, if I have a fraction in parentheses to a negative, I think it's easier to take the reciprocal first. So that's going to be 5 over 2 to the positive 3. Okay, so I took the reciprocal and I got rid of the negative. Okay, so then I have to distribute my third power, so that'll give me 125 over 8. Okay, again, notice that was not 15 over 6. They are exponents, so 5 to the third power is 125, 2 to the third power is 8. Okay, letter I, numbers are numbers, so do those separate. 5 over 10 reduces down to 1/2. I've got variables, okay, and I'm just going to remember that variables mean I need to subtract. So 5 minus negative 6 really becomes 11, so z to the 11th. Okay, and then you're done. If you don't like that way and you want to move, again, you would keep your 5, you would keep your z to the 5th, you would keep your 10, but then you would move your z to the 6th to the top, which would give you z to the 11th over 2, which would give you the exact same answer. Okay, so if you want to, you can do it 2 different ways. I just like to subtract. I think it saves you a step. Okay, letter J. Okay, this looks a little complicated. Let's just keep it just like everything else. Keep your numbers out front. Okay, those are separate. So 6 divided by 1/2 is 12. Okay, and then let's treat this part over here like variables. Okay, because the 10 is the base, we'll treat it like an x for now. So negative 5 minus negative 2 becomes negative 3. So that would be times 10 to the negative third power. Okay, treat it like a variable. So that would give me 12 over 10 to the positive third. Okay, again, I have to get rid of my negative sign, so it moves down here and becomes positive, which gives me 12 over 1,000. And then if I reduce that, that gets me 3 over 250 for my final answer. Okay, so don't multiply out. Okay, keep your numbers separate from your variables. And in this case, the 10s acted like variables because it was the same base on the top and the bottom of the fraction. Okay, and one last tricky one to see how you're really grasping these things. So first thing I would do is I would distribute here. So it's going to give me 5 to the negative third, x to the negative sixth. Then I've got times 5 to the fourth, x to the negative 2. Okay, again, the numbers here, you're going to treat them just like variables because you see 2 different ones. So 2 different ones means I'm going to add them. So it's going to give me 5 to the first because negative 3 plus 4 is 1. Then I'll do my x's. Again, I'm going to add, so that's going to give me x to the negative 8th. Okay, negative 6 plus negative 2 is negative 8. Then I have to get rid of the negative. My 5 is positive, so I'm going to keep my 5 on top, and then my x is the part that's negative, so that's going to go down the bottom and become a positive. Okay, so my final answer would be 5 over x to the 8th. Okay, so sometimes people don't like leaving it like this unsimplified in the beginning, okay, but go ahead, it makes it really easy. Just 5 to the negative third, and then figure out that you've got some similar bases here, okay, and then you just add them and it simplifies out nicely. Okay, so the negative exponent is taking the reciprocal. See if you still have questions, write them down, and come to class with those ready tomorrow.